Hey guys, tonight we begin with the unforgettable life and working conditions of brothel boys in the Qing Dynasty. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're born somewhere between a pile of rice husks and a sigh. A back alley in Jiangnan probably, though no one bothered to write it down. Your mother calls you her little treasure, but the kind that costs more to keep than it's worth. You're the third son, which in Qing Dynasty economics puts you just above the family goat and just below the bucket. Food is scarce. Attention is scarcer. Your oldest brother is being groomed to inherit the family's one viable career path, probably chopping wood or collecting taxes, whichever pays slightly less. Your second brother is the backup plan. You? Your plan C. As in, can we sell him to Madame Xiang before he hits puberty? You're pretty. It's not your fault. Your lashes are long, your skin's suspiciously smooth, and your shoulders slope in that aesthetically tragic way poets love. So when a silk-robed woman shows up to admire the neighborhood children, you're presented like a melon at market. She nods approvingly, hands your father a pouch of coins, not many, but more than you're likely to earn hauling turnips for a decade. And suddenly you're being told how lucky you are. You're going to the city. You'll be dressed in silk. You'll live in a refined establishment. You don't know what that means, but your mother is crying, and your father is suddenly interested in repainting the door. They rename you before you even arrive. Something like Little Plum or Fragrant Wind. Your old name is now irrelevant, like your opinions or dietary preferences. You ask if you'll come back home. They say yes. They say it quickly. You're 9. You almost believe them. The journey to the brothel is long, quiet, and smells like mildew and regret. By the time the city gates open and you see your new home, a lacquered building with red lanterns and suspiciously happy music, you already understand something important. You've been sold. Not traded, not adopted, not apprenticed. Sold. Like a good pair of boots or a decent pig. And the worst part? You're about to learn how to smile about it. You arrive at the brothel with the optimism of a damp towel. The building is large, colourful, and smells like incense and overcompensation. A painted sign swings in the breeze above the door, announcing your new home in poetic characters that translate loosely to House of Blossoms and Gentlemen. You are neither blossom nor gentleman, but no one seems concerned. A maid, or maybe a prison guard with better posture, escorts you inside and begins the transformation. First, your clothes are taken. Not folded and set aside, but taken. You're handed something silkier, tighter, and suspiciously fragrant. You look like a dumpling wrapped in regret. Then comes the bath. Not a warm soak, but a full-body interrogation by boiling water, and a woman with a loofah like a cheese grater. She scrubs you like you owe her silver. Hair, washed. Skin, buffed. Nails, trimmed to perfection. Dignity, down the drain. Perfume is next. Not dabbed, not spritzed. Poured. You smell like a floral arrangement that lost a fight with a spice rack. Apparently, natural scent is not in the job description. You are now expected to carry the aroma of peach blossoms, powdered moonlight, and whatever masculine allure is when it's distilled into something that stings the eyes. After the external renovations, it's time for etiquette school. You're told to smile, but not too wide. Walk gracefully, but not like a dancer. Speak poetically, but not like a scholar. Nobody wants to be outwitted by their wine pourer. You learn how to kneel, pour tea, and look interested while someone recounts their government exam scores from 20 years ago. It's less education, more theatrical training for a life of exquisite pretending. One of the older boys, let's call him Whispering Bamboo because that's his actual work name, takes you aside and gives you the rundown. Flatter them. Feed them. Never correct their poetry. And if they want you to sing, for the love of the ancestors, Don't sing louder than them. You nod. You want to ask if it gets better. He just stares for a long time and says, "You'll get used to it." Spoiler. You won't. You thought the worst was over when the loofah lady left. You were wrong. The brothel has a curriculum, and unlike school, truancy is not an option. Your new education begins the moment you can stand upright without dripping sandalwood oil. You're handed a fan, a script, and the knowledge that your entire future now depends on the convincing delivery of compliments to sweaty old men. Step 1. Posture. Apparently, you've been walking wrong your entire life. You're told to glide, not stomp. Float like a poem, the madam says. You try. You look more like a drunk goose. She sighs deeply and mutters something about peasants with ankles like oxen. Step 2. Voice. Yours is too loud, too flat, too honest. You're taught to speak in a pitch halfway between apology and seduction. You practice saying things like, "Esteemed guest, your presence is as radiant as the moon over Westlake," without laughing. It's hard. You nearly rupture your liver holding it in. Step 3. Poetry. Not writing it. Heavens no. Your job is to memorize and recite it as if it means something. You don't know what "jade fragrance dances with spring wind" even means, but you're told it makes old men feel nostalgic, which apparently helps loosen their wallets. Step 4. Music. You learn to pluck the peeper, though your instructor openly weeps every time you play. Not out of emotion, just pain. You also learn a bit of flute, because nothing says, "Please tip me," like a child playing a wind instrument with dead eyes. Step 5. Wine service. This is the most sacred of arts. You must pour without spilling, refill without asking, and always, always keep your wrist limp and graceful. You're told the proper wrist flick can earn a whole silver tael. You try. You splash wine on a customer's lap and nearly get reassigned to dishwashing. And then there's smiling. You're told it's your most valuable asset. Not too toothy, not too sly, just enough to say, "I find you deeply amusing. Please keep paying for my rice." You practice in the mirror. You frighten yourself. At the end of each day, your legs ache, your brain is full of Qing Dynasty metaphors, and your soul is clinging to a bamboo flute for dear life. But congratulations, you're officially in training. Whatever that means. You've spent weeks preparing for this. Training, posture, flute solos, poetry about moons and chrysanthemums. But none of it prepares you for them, the clients. They arrive like a parade of midlife crises and bad cologne. There's a lot of silk, not a lot of teeth. You expected elegance. What you get is a gaggle of civil servants, merchants with delusions of poetry, and one man who insists he once met the emperor's cousin. Twice. Madame Xiang, your ever-scheming boss and part-time demon in pearls, lines you up with the other boys for the evening showcase. You're expected to smile, fan in hand, and somehow look both innocent and mildly available. You resemble a hostage auditioning for a tea commercial. The first man points at you. "This one," he grunts, like he's ordering duck. You're taken to a private room decorated with faded wall scrolls and the scent of steamed dumplings. He sits. You kneel. He talks. You nod. He talks more. You nod again. It's like performance art, except with less meaning and more foot sweat. He quotes poetry. Badly. You're expected to act amazed. "Your beauty, like spring's first rain, drips into my heart," he recites, slurring the metaphor into something that sounds more like plumbing trouble. You murmur something vaguely admiring, pour his wine, and make a mental note to scream into a pillow later. The evening drags on. You refill his cup. You massage his ego. You pretend to laugh at a joke about tax ledgers. He touches your shoulder and calls you graceful. You pretend it's a compliment and not a warning sign. Eventually he leaves. Not because he's satisfied, but because he's out of silver. You bow politely as he stumbles out, then collapse into the nearest chair like a puppet whose strings have been cut. Whispering Bamboo pats you on the back. "Not bad for your first time," he says. "He only tried to touch your hair. Could have been worse." You blink. That was good. But no one asks what you think. You're now officially one of them. A brothel boy in the House of Blossoms. A performer in a theatre of illusions. A peach-scented ghost haunting other people's fantasies. And this was just the easy customer. You thought pouring tea would be the easy part. How hard could it be to tip a pot and not spill? Turns out, in a Qing Dynasty brothel, everything is performance. Even tea. Before the evening starts, you're briefed on the sacred ritual of the tea set. Each item has meaning. Each gesture is calibrated to charm, beguile, and subtly distract your guest from the fact that he's spending his savings on fermented leaves and forced compliments. You practice for hours, holding the teapot by the tail like a swan's neck, pouring in long, elegant streams without looking, and smiling. Always smiling, even when the steam scalds your wrist and you've made eye contact with your reflection in the cup and questioned all your life choices. The first real client tonight is a scholar. At least he says he's a scholar. He wears a lot of ink stains and quotes Confucius with the enthusiasm of a man hoping it makes up for his breath. You kneel, you smile, you pour. "Such grace," he says, watching you tilt the pot. Like a crane at dawn, you nearly laugh, but you hold it in. Because now it's time for flirtation, the most ambiguous battlefield in the brothel world. You're instructed to be playful but distant, warm but unattainable, and alluring yet innocent. In other words, a cat, but with better posture. So you begin. You compliment his poem, which references plum blossoms and loneliness. You tilt your head slightly, widen your eyes, a classic brothel trick. He looks at you like you've just validated his entire literary career. He giggles. You refill his cup. He leans in. You lean back, just enough to make it seem deliberate, not defensive. He sighs, sips, and begins to tell you about his youth, his dreams, and his complex relationship with his mother. You nod empathetically, while mentally counting tea leaves and wondering if your peeper string is still broken. By the end of the evening, he leaves lighter in wallet and heavier in self-worth. You've smiled so long your cheeks hurt. But congratulations, you've successfully executed a flawless round of strategic tea seduction. You'll do it again tomorrow, and the day after that, until you die, or marry rich, whichever comes first. By now, you've mastered the smile, the tea pour, the subtle art of pretending to care about a man's calligraphy. But even with all your charm, you're still a nobody. Because in the brothel, hierarchy is sacred. And you're currently positioned just slightly above the chamber potboy and slightly below the cat. At the top is Madame Xiang, supreme ruler of the House of Blossoms. She doesn't walk, she floats, trailing perfume and judgment. Her word is law. Her fan is sharper than most daggers. If she taps it twice, someone's career ends. If she taps it thrice, someone disappears entirely. Then there's Whispering Bamboo, the senior boy. He's been here since the Kangxi Emperor still had black hair. Elegant, sly, and dangerously good with a flute, he can make men cry with a poem or open their coin purses with a wink. He says things like, "We are instruments of fantasy, darling," and makes it sound profound. He has his own room, his own clientele, and, most enviably, he no longer has to pour tea for drunk butchers from Shandong. Beneath him are the established boys, each with their own specialties. Night Lotus does erotic riddles. Jade Cricket sings falsetto opera. Red Peony has an actual fan club of retired generals. They have territories, preferred clients, and corner seats at mealtime. They also have egos the size of palace roofs. You're a new blossom. Translation: cheap, replaceable, and mostly here to look pretty while being told what to do by boys wearing more makeup than you. You sleep in a shared room with 5 others, bathe last, and get the leftovers from the dumpling tray. If you're lucky, you might get assigned to pour wine for one of the lesser merchants, the ones who tip in compliments and coughs. Of course, below you are the runners and scrubbers, boys who haven't yet proven they can string 3 flirty sentences together. They fetch towels, heat water, and get blamed for everything from broken teacups to awkward silences. The hierarchy is strict, and any attempt to jump it is punished. Whisper too loudly about Madame Xiang's wig glue, you're scrubbing chamber pots, accidentally outperform a senior boy. Congratulations, you now serve his tea. In this world, survival isn't about beauty. It's about knowing your place, staying in your lane, and pretending you love it there. You used to think glamour meant silk robes, perfumed hair, and dreamy looks over lantern light. A magical life, right? Wrong. Turns out glamour is expensive, not just in money, though you're not seeing much of that either, but in time, dignity, and alarming quantities of goose fat. Your morning routine starts before sunrise, before roosters, before your soul is even awake. You stumble to the bathing room, where cold water awaits like an ambush. Hot water is for clients. You, meanwhile, get the luxury of shivering while washing off the faint smell of yesterday's powdered humiliation. Then comes makeup, a process that requires 2 mirrors, 3 arguments, and a steady hand. Your face must be painted to perfection. Porcelain skin, blood-red lips, eyebrows shaped like willow leaves and disappointment. A single smudge, and Madame Xiang will appear from the shadows like an angry ghost. Your hair, a battlefield of pins, wax, and hairpieces. It's sculpted into a shape that defies physics and occasionally balance. You can't lie down properly, can't scratch your scalp, and birds now regard your head as potential nesting real estate. Then there's wardrobe. Silk robes so delicate they tear if you breathe wrong. Decorative sashes that cut off circulation. Slippers made for someone with half your foot size and none of your daily mileage. All of it looks glorious under the lanterns, until you realize it takes 3 people to help you go to the toilet. Of course, you're expected to maintain this look for hours. You can't sweat, sneeze, or frown too hard. You are a painting, a fantasy, a fragile illusion made of rice powder and lies. Meanwhile, the clients assume you just wake up like this. They sip tea, compliment your skin, and ask if you're naturally graceful. You want to tell them it's the 3rd corset layer keeping you upright, but instead you giggle and pour more tea. At night, you finally peel off the layers, wipe off the lacquered face, and stare into the mirror. You look young, tired, real. For a moment, you remember your actual self, the boy behind the silk and the smile. And then you go to bed, knowing tomorrow you'll do it all again. Because beauty isn't effortless. It's just heavily curated suffering. By now, you've learned that the brothel is not just a place of business. It's a theatre, a battleground, a fashion show, and occasionally, a soup kitchen for emotionally needy officials. But it's also a place of rules, strange, specific, and occasionally enforced by a man holding a rooster feather fan. Which brings us to the forbidden ones. There are clients you're allowed to charm, merchants, scholars, retired soldiers with coin and cataracts. And then there are the off-limits elite, the ones who enter through the back door, never give their names, and are followed by guards who look like they bite. Your instructions are clear. Don't make eye contact, don't flirt, don't speak unless spoken to. And even then, don't be interesting. Naturally, the forbidden ones are the most curious of all. High-ranking eunuchs, royal cousins, court officials with secrets leaking out of their sleeves. They don't come here for tea. They come here for control, and to be adored without complication. They pick their favourites. Sometimes it's the brooding flute player. Sometimes it's the quiet boy with moonbeam skin. Once, disturbingly, it was the kitchen boy who sings to ducks. If you're chosen by one, your life changes overnight. You get better food, softer robes, private quarters, and the unspoken understanding that you now belong to someone. Some boys call it a blessing. Others call it a polite kind of prison. You see it play out one evening. A forbidden one, let's call him Minister Black Robe, chooses whispering bamboo. One day, he's sipping plum wine and reciting poems. The next, he's gone. No farewell, no trace. Just a single lotus left on his pillow, like something out of a tragic opera. The house goes silent for a week. You learn two things. 1, everyone is replaceable. 2, the forbidden ones don't like goodbyes. Occasionally, rumours swirl about a boy who escaped, one who ran off with a noblewoman, or faked death with pig's blood, or joined a Buddhist temple disguised as a mute. Every version ends with, and they were never seen again, which in this place may actually count as a happy ending. So you keep your eyes down. You smile just enough. You stay forgettable, because being too visible here can make you disappear, and not in a poetic way. You've served the tea. You've giggled at bad poetry. You've somehow survived a week wearing silk socks in monsoon humidity. But tonight, the curtain sways. It's the soft signal that the performance has entered its next act, the private one, the one with fewer props, no audience, and very different expectations. You step behind it, not because you want to, but because saying no would be impolite and potentially career-ending. The room is warm, too warm. Scented oils float in the air like lies. A client reclines on the silk-covered couch, smiling with all the subtlety of a cat near a birdcage. What happens behind the curtain is never officially discussed. It's not written in the brothel rules. It's whispered about in the laundry room, half in gossip, half in cautionary tale. Here you are no longer a performer. You are a fantasy, more mirror than man. The client doesn't want you. He wants the version of you that sighs on cue, laughs in 3 tones, and finds his joke about duck intestines absolutely thrilling. Sometimes you simply talk. Sometimes you sing. Sometimes you hold a hand and say you understand things you absolutely do not understand. But sometimes it's more, and when it's more, there's a performance to uphold. The graceful removal of robes, the practiced gasp, the delicate balancing act between seduction and self-preservation. You are an artist, a diplomat, and a trained acrobat of emotional labour. Your thoughts drift elsewhere, to home, to lunch, to the sound of rain on tile rooftops, anything that makes the moment feel less sticky. Some clients are kind. They ask how you are. They hold you like porcelain and leave coins without groping for discounts. Others treat you like part of the furniture, something soft, silent, and easy to replace. But no matter what happens, when the curtain opens again, you must emerge smiling, composed, presentable, as if nothing just happened that might have chipped away at your soul. The other boys look at you, nod subtly. They know. They've been there. They'll be there again. You fix your robe, powder your face, step back into the light, because out here, it's all about illusion. And the curtain? That's just there to keep reality conveniently out of sight. You live in one of the busiest brothels in the pleasure quarters of Qing Dynasty China, and yet your favourite activity is imagining you live literally anywhere else. It's not just you. Every brothel boy has a secret life. Not in reality, of course. Reality involves blisters, incense headaches, and pretending to be excited about drunk tax collectors. But in your head, you are free, wealthy, stunningly talented, and probably married to someone with a forehead that doesn't sweat during tea. Your escape begins when you close your eyes between clients. You imagine sailing down the Yangtze, playing the guqin under moonlight, or owning a tea house where the only drama is a spilled cup and not, say, a crying mandarin in your lap. Some boys imagine becoming opera stars. Others, courtesans with actual agency. A delightful oxymoron if there ever was one. Whispering bamboo, always a romantic, dreams of being stolen away by a kind noblewoman with a horse and 0 questions about his past. Your fantasy is more modest. Your own bed, clean rice, and never having to apply powdered rouge to your neck again. Of course, you know none of these are particularly realistic. That's why they're called fantasies and not exit strategies. Actual escape attempts are rare, and when they happen, they're usually the stuff of legend. One boy faked a seizure mid-dance, leapt out the window, and swam through a koi pond before being caught by Madame Xiang holding a soup ladle like a weapon. He now does laundry. Forever. So instead, you escape in little ways. A nap in the storage room. A joke whispered behind a fan. A song hummed under your breath that reminds you of a simpler time. When you thought street food was a luxury and not your only dinner option. In a place where everything is performance, fantasy becomes the only thing that's truly yours, and so you treasure it. You polish it in your mind like jade. You hold it close when the curtain falls, the client leaves, and you're just a tired boy in a painted face, too young to carry this much longing. Maybe one day, fantasy becomes memory. But until then, you dream, because that costs nothing. Yet, you've grown used to the flickering lanterns, the clinking cups, the rustle of silk, and the quiet tragedy of someone weeping in the bathhouse over a lost hairpin. It's just another Tuesday. But then the outsiders arrive. Not clients, those you can handle. These are different. Curious people. People who walk like the world belongs to them. Scholars, travellers, missionaries, men and women who peer into your world with that wide-eyed expression of someone reading a scandalous chapter from a book they pretend they don't own. Some come to observe, sketching everything from the furniture to your eyelashes in little notebooks. They marvel at your posture, your painted lips, the way you pour tea like it's a sacred rite, instead of something you learn to avoid wrist cramps. "Oh, how elegant," they whisper. "So mysterious, so delicate, as if you're a butterfly pinned to a board, instead of a person whose shoes don't fit and who hasn't had a private cry in over a month." Some come to save you, offering prayers, pamphlets, and unsolicited opinions. They call your life immoral, as if that word can wrap around every nuance of power, poverty, and obligation, like a neat little moral dumpling. But the worst are the ones who romanticize you. They see poetry in your suffering, art in your exhaustion. They talk about the noble beauty of sacrifice, while sitting on cushioned chairs with rice dumplings you are definitely not allowed to eat. Sometimes they ask questions like, "Do you like it here?" And you smile. Of course you do. Who wouldn't love a job that involves emotional labour, public performance, and the occasional risk of venereal disease? You've learned to perform, not just for clients, but for the gaze. That gaze that turns you into an object, elegant, tragic, and above all, silent. And yet, part of you wants to shout. To say, "I'm not a character in your travel diary. I'm not a footnote in your thesis. I'm not your fantasy. I'm me." But you don't say it. You bow. You smile. You go back to your duties. Because in this place, survival depends on knowing which parts of yourself to hide and which parts to sell. Every so often, a boy simply vanishes. No dramatic exits, no farewell poems. One night he's applying rice powder beside you, complaining about a client's garlic breath, and the next morning, his mat is empty, his comb is missing, and the only trace left is a faint scent of plum oil. Naturally, the official explanation is always the same. He was sent to another house, which sounds wonderfully professional, like a promotion or a transfer, except no one ever sees or hears from him again. You learn not to ask too many questions. At first, it's alarming. Then it becomes routine, like rain or foot fungus. You mark it with a nod, maybe a whispered, "He deserved better," and move on to rehearse your new song for the clients. Rumours thrive in this silence. Some say the boy ran away, slipped through the roof tiles, disguised as a noodle vendor, living free under the stars. Others say he was sold to a more exclusive establishment, where the pillows are softer and the rules are worse. Then there are darker whispers. Illness, punishment, or simply not earning enough to be worth the rice he was fed. No one speaks these things out loud. In this business, imagination is currency, and reality is best kept in storage with the old costumes and broken fans. Still, you remember them. The way Lotus used to hum off-key when he was nervous. How Little Deer always braided his own hair because he didn't trust anyone else's fingers. How you once shared a stolen dumpling with Plum Blossom behind the courtyard wall and pretended it was a banquet. Now they are names you don't dare say aloud. You carry them quietly, like hidden bruises. Reminders that this life has rules, and one of them is that not everyone finishes the act. You begin to rehearse your own disappearance. Just in case. A mental map of the alleyways, a coin hidden in a shoe, an imagined version of yourself who gets out and grows old and forgets what it felt like to sleep beneath a silk canopy with your heart clenched like a fist. But until that day, if it ever comes, you paint your face, you strike your pose, and you don't ask what happened to the others, because deep down, you already know. In most professions, a promotion means more money, more respect, and the slight illusion of control. In your line of work, a promotion mostly means you've survived long enough without fainting, fleeing, or offending the wrong nobleman. If you're lucky, and lucky here includes a strong liver, flexible morals, and high cheekbones, you might be selected for an elevated role. That sounds glamorous, doesn't it? Almost imperial. In reality, it just means fancier costumes and clients with more titles in their names than teeth in their mouths. One day, Madame Xiang calls you in. You brace for the usual reprimand, but instead, she tilts her head and says, "You've been noticed. Congratulations. You're now a house favorite. That means you'll get the juiciest clients. Not necessarily the best, just the ones who pay enough to justify your impending back problems. You're given a new robe, thicker makeup, and a new set of instructions that are somehow even more specific than before. Don't slouch. Speak slower. Lower your eyes, but not too much. And absolutely do not correct the client's calligraphy mid-seduction. Apparently, that's off-putting. Promotion also comes with more backstage politics. The lower-ranked boys now eye you like a crane watching a frog. Your fans go missing. Your tea is mysteriously saltier. Lotus mutters under his breath that beauty fades but pettiness is forever. Still, there are perks. Your bedding is replaced. You get an extra dumpling on festival days. And once, a visiting official gave you a turtle in a jade bowl and called it a symbol of longevity. You're still not sure if he meant for you or the turtle. But with status comes pressure. You're expected to be perfect, graceful, clever, always just shy of rebellion. You are the brothel's advertisement, its crown jewel, its heavily powdered product, and one misstep, one insulted general, one poorly timed yawn, and it's back to cleaning chamber pots with your sleeve. So you smile. You sing. You serve. You nod sagely at nonsense and pretend not to notice the ink stain on your sleeve from where you scribbled poems between visits. Promotion, it turns out, is just a higher shelf in the same cabinet. But hey, at least the dumplings are warmer. In the brothel, time isn't measured in years. It's measured in how long your face holds up under candlelight and rice powder. And let's just say the candles are brutal. You're not old. You're maybe 20-something, if anyone were actually keeping count. But in brothel years, you're pushing retirement. Your joints make suspicious noises. Your fan dances have a bit more ow than wow. And the new boys are starting to call you Gege, older brother, with just a touch too much pity. You remember when you were the new boy, fresh-faced, terrified, and certain that eyeliner was a form of torture. Now you can apply it in your sleep, which you've done twice, but you've learned something important. Youth is currency, and you are now operating on credit. Clients still ask for you, but less for flirtation and more for deep conversation. A terrifying sign. Nothing screams, you're aging out of desirability, like being valued for your personality. Madame Xiang eyes you like someone deciding whether to sell a horse or make it into soup. You overhear whispers about transitioning to tutor work. Code for training the next crop of terrified teenagers. Fantastic. Nothing like watching your replacements arrive. Shinier and more enthusiastic, with knees that don't audibly click. You start noticing things. The crow's feet that weren't there before. the way your robe fits a little looser in the wrong places, the fact that you now require actual tea to stay awake instead of just theatrical tea sipping. And still, you keep up the act. You flirt, you sing, you say things like, "You remind me of a poem," while trying not to wince when your back spasms mid-bow. Because aging in a brothel is like being a fading wall scroll, once admired, now mostly dusted around. Of course, there are legends of boys who age out gracefully, who marry rich clients, open their own tea houses, or vanish into myth like smoke through the rafters. But you suspect they're just that. Legends. Probably made up by Madame Xiang to keep you moisturized and hopeful. So you do what you must. You reapply the powder. You rehearse the lines. You laugh at jokes you've heard 1,000 times. And you hope that when your curtain finally falls, you'll still remember who you were, beneath the paint. You've heard the word tossed around a lot. Freedom. Whispers between curtains. Drunken promises from clients. The occasional poem someone scrawls on a napkin before burning it in the lantern light. But what is it really? In the brothel, freedom is a concept sold with the same enthusiasm as scented soap. It's out there, somewhere, but always one tip, one favour, or one miracle away. Madame Xiang sometimes dangles it like a carrot on a string. "Serve well, and you may retire early," she'll say. As if retiring from this place didn't just mean you disappear one day and no one asks questions. Some say freedom is getting bought, as if becoming the private pet of a wealthy merchant is somehow liberation. Yes, you'd get a larger room and fancier silk, but you'd still be someone's ornament, just dusted more often. Others dream of escape, slipping out during festival chaos, hiding in a hay cart, reinventing yourself as a monk, a travelling musician, or something even more delusional, like a normal person. But you've seen what happens to those who try. Caught, dragged back, their punishment quiet and private, but loud enough to echo in the bones of everyone else. You once asked an older boy, one who'd been there since before you could hold a teacup without trembling, what freedom meant to him. He just laughed and said, "It's when you can choose who touches you." Then he went back to trimming his lashes. Now, as you apply your paint and rehearse your smile for another round of gentle company, you begin to wonder, maybe freedom isn't a door that opens. Maybe it's a corner of your mind they haven't reached. A hidden place where your name still exists, untouched by rouge and rumour. Maybe it's writing poems in code. Maybe it's knowing that the client misquoted Confucius and not correcting him, because you know better. Maybe it's finishing your dance even when your ankle's twisted, because you decided you would. Tiny acts of rebellion dressed in silk and submission. So no, you're not free, not yet, but inside where no lantern can reach, you're still yours. And in this place, that's a revolution. In the world of ancient Rome, clothing was never just about fabric stitched together. It was identity, reputation, and public status draped across the body for all to see. For women, no garment carried more weight than the stola. This long, pleated dress was the defining costume of the respectable Roman matron, so much so that its absence could speak louder than its presence. If you were seen without one, society already had a story to tell about you, and it wasn't a flattering one. The stola itself was deceptively simple. A floor-length garment, sleeveless or with short sleeves, often secured at the shoulders and tied with one or more belts around the waist. But like all Roman fashion, simplicity concealed layers of meaning. The cut created an image of modesty, covering the body while still allowing elegance. It was designed to move gracefully, to glide with the wearer rather than cling. To Roman eyes, this restraint reflected a woman's virtue, her modesty, chastity, and loyalty to her household. Wearing the stola said, "I belong to a family, to a husband, to Rome's social order." Material mattered just as much as form. A wealthy senator's wife might wear a stola of imported silk or linen, light as air and dyed in colours that screamed expense. These dyes, Tyrian purple, saffron yellow, deep emerald, were luxuries in themselves. A middle-class woman, by contrast, might wear one of wool, simple and unadorned, echoing the old Roman ideal of modest living. Thus, the stola spoke two languages at once. It declared both respectability and rank. But not every woman had the right to wear it. Slaves, prostitutes, and women of ill repute were excluded. Widows often abandoned it, signalling the loss of their marital bond. Even divorced women might be pressured to put it away. To wear or not to wear was a matter of social regulation, one that reinforced who was inside and who was outside the bounds of Roman morality. So, when you imagine a Roman street scene, women in long, flowing stolas crossing the forum or standing in temple courtyards, understand that you're not just looking at clothing. You're looking at a uniform of virtue, a garment heavy with meaning, one that whispered obedience, power, or shame depending on the eyes that saw it. If the stola was the foundation of Roman womanhood, the palla was its finishing touch. Imagine a large rectangular shawl, sometimes plain, sometimes richly decorated, draped over the stola in endless variations. The palla was both cloak and canvas. How it was worn could signal a woman's mood, her intentions, and even her social aspirations. The simplest way was to let it hang loosely over the shoulders, a sign of relaxation or domestic comfort. But in public, women often pulled it tightly around the body, creating a cocoon of modesty. This was especially important in the bustling chaos of Roman streets, where men shouted, vendors bargained, and eyes followed every movement. Draping the palla over the head, almost like a veil, transformed it into a symbol of chastity and reverence, particularly during religious ceremonies. A matron entering a temple with her head covered by the palla wasn't just respecting the gods. She was visually proclaiming her dignity to everyone present. Colour and fabric elevated the message. Fine wool in muted tones gave an air of traditional Roman virtue, while silks dyed in luxurious purples and reds made a very different statement: wealth, power, and connections that reached beyond Rome into the trade networks of the East. Elite women knew that eyes lingered on silk that shimmered in the sunlight, and they used that effect to command attention without a single word. A carefully draped palla could show just enough of the jewels or embroidery beneath to tease status while still maintaining the appearance of modesty. But the palla could also carry moral judgment. A woman who neglected to wear it in public might be criticized as careless or immodest. Satirists like Juvenal mocked women who draped it too provocatively, twisting its folds into something flirtatious rather than respectable. Thus the palla was a double-edged garment, a shield of virtue, yet also a stage prop in Rome's endless theatre of appearances. For Roman women, fashion was rarely neutral. Every gesture of fabric, whether the palla was clutched close, swept dramatically over the shoulder, or drawn across the head, was a line in the ongoing performance of identity. In a society that scrutinized women's behavior relentlessly, the palla gave them a language of folds and drapery to speak without words. In ancient Rome, hair was not just hair. It was a stage for wealth, power, and personality. For elite women, hairstyles became architectural wonders, with braids coiled like serpents, curls piled high into towers, and intricate arrangements held together by pins of ivory, silver, or even gold. To step out into society with a plain hairstyle was unthinkable for those who could afford extravagance. The head, after all, was the first thing people noticed, and in Rome, first impressions could make or break reputations. During the Republic, styles were simpler: buns at the nape of the neck, hair parted in the middle, modestly arranged to reflect traditional Roman virtues of restraint and discipline. But by the Empire, especially under the Julio-Claudian and Flavian dynasties, restraint gave way to spectacle. Empresses like Julia Domna or the Flavian women turned their hair into living crowns, towering several inches high. These coiffures required not only patience but also an army of enslaved hairdressers, known as ornatresses, who spent hours arranging every curl into perfection. The complexity of the style itself became a sign of wealth. If you had the time and servants to construct it, you clearly belonged to the highest class. Wigs and false hairpieces were another layer of the fashion. Roman women often imported blonde hair from Germany or red hair from Gaul, attaching it to their own locks to create contrast or volume. These additions added exotic flair, signaling both sophistication and Rome's dominion over faraway lands. Critics, of course, were quick to point out the irony. The same women who flaunted German hairpins were dressing themselves with the hair of conquered barbarians. Hairstyles also carried political undertones. Imitating the empress's hairdo was a way of aligning oneself with the ruling family. If the empress wore waves of curls across her forehead, soon dozens of aristocratic women in Rome copied the look. Fashion thus spread not through magazines or TikTok trends, but through the silent power of imperial influence. To style your hair a certain way was to declare loyalty, or at least admiration, for the dynasty in charge. But there was danger in excess. Satirists like Juvenal mocked women whose hair grew so tall it needed scaffolding of wires. He claimed their heads resembled ships ready for battle. Whether admired or ridiculed, Roman women's hairstyles were never neutral. Each curl was a statement, each braid a message. Their hair was not vanity, it was politics, woven strand by strand. If clothing spoke of virtue and hair revealed fashion, jewelry was where Roman women made their boldest declarations of wealth and power. Rings, necklaces, earrings, and bracelets weren't just decorative. They were investments, status symbols, and sometimes even political tools. The glitter of gold and the shimmer of gemstones announced a woman's place in society before she even introduced herself. Earrings were especially popular. Elite women wore elaborate pairs inlaid with pearls imported from the Persian Gulf or India, gems that travelled thousands of miles to rest on Roman ears. A single pearl could cost more than a soldier's yearly wage, and Roman writers loved to point out the extravagance. Pliny the Elder famously lamented that women wore entire fortunes dangling from their ears. To him, it was wasteful excess. To Roman matrons, it was a visible guarantee of their household's prosperity. Necklaces and chains often featured pendants of amethyst, emerald, or carnelian carved into cameos. These weren't just pretty stones. Many Romans believed gems carried protective or mystical properties. Amethyst was thought to guard against drunkenness, while coral was worn as a charm against evil spirits. Thus, jewellery served not only as adornment, but as a shield of superstition. A Roman woman might step into the forum with a necklace that was both a fashion piece and a silent prayer. Bracelets, often worn in pairs, encircled wrists, and sometimes even the upper arm. Designs mimicked snakes coiling around the limb, symbolizing eternity and rebirth. Rings were another favorite, often large and flashy, displaying gems engraved with family symbols, deities, or protective motifs. Though Roman law limited men to wearing one ring for citizenship, women were free to pile them on, and many did so with pride. For wealthy women, jewellery boxes were miniature treasure vaults. Goldsmiths and craftsmen catered to their tastes, while husbands often gifted jewels as tokens of affection, or as public proof of their ability to provide. But jewellery could also become a source of criticism. Writers sneered at women who covered themselves in so many jewels that they resembled walking treasure chests, accusing them of vanity and greed. Still, jewellery endured as one of the most personal and powerful aspects of Roman women's fashion. Unlike the stola or palla, which were governed by social rules, jewellery was more flexible. It allowed women to showcase individuality, to blend luxury with superstition, and to wear their wealth literally on their skin. If clothing and jewellery framed the Roman woman's outward identity, cosmetics and perfumes added the finishing brushstrokes. To the modern eye, Roman beauty practices might seem indulgent, but in antiquity, they were serious business. Skin, scent, and makeup became tools of persuasion, allure, and sometimes even subtle defiance of social expectations. The ideal Roman complexion was pale, smooth, and unblemished. To achieve it, women used chalk powders, ground white lead, or even vinegar-based facial masks. Some recipes promised to brighten the skin, others to erase wrinkles or scars. Wealthier women had access to exotic ingredients imported from across the empire: Egyptian coal, Babylonian powders, and rare resins. Of course, some of these mixtures were toxic, but beauty often came at a cost. To step into society with clear, pale skin was to show you didn't labour under the sun, that you lived a life of leisure, far removed from the toil of commoners. Rouge was equally important. Red cheeks and lips were painted using crushed mulberries, wine dregs, or cinnabar. A touch of colour signalled youth and vitality, but too much provoked scandal. Satirists gleefully mocked women who overpainted their faces, accusing them of hiding behind masks. Yet the demand for rouge never disappeared. It was the little secret every Roman woman carried on her skin. Eye makeup was another battlefield. Black coal, drawn in bold lines around the eyes, created dramatic definition and was borrowed directly from Egyptian traditions. Green and blue eyeshadows, made from malachite or lapis lazuli, added flair, though they were costly. To critics, these painted eyes suggested decadence. To admirers, they were captivating. Perfumed oils were then applied to the hair and body, completing the ensemble with invisible luxury. Perfumes themselves were an empire within the empire. Rome imported spices and resins from Arabia, India, and North Africa, blending them into complex fragrances stored in glass bottles or alabaster jars. The scent of frankincense, myrrh, or cinnamon clung to a woman as strongly as her stola or jewels. Perfume announced her arrival before she spoke and lingered after she left, a sensual signature. But, as with all aspects of fashion, there was tension. Philosophers condemned heavy cosmetics and perfumes as signs of vanity or moral weakness. Still, for Roman women navigating a world that judged their appearance relentlessly, these powders and oils weren't just vanity, they were armour. With every painted cheek and perfumed wrist, they crafted power out of beauty. Though Roman women's fashion is often remembered for flowing fabrics and elaborate hairstyles, footwear was equally important. Shoes were more than protection for the feet. They were indicators of class, occasion, and even morality. To step into the world in the wrong pair was to risk whispers, satire, or outright exclusion. At the simplest level, Roman women wore sandals, or solei, flat-soled and strapped with leather. These were the everyday choice, practical for the home and the warmer streets of Rome. Their simplicity, however, did not mean invisibility. Wealthy women could have their sandals decorated with coloured leather, dyed straps, or even gilded studs, turning a humble design into a quiet flex of luxury. For indoor wear, especially in private households, some women went barefoot, suggesting intimacy and domestic ease. When stepping into public spaces, more formal footwear appeared. Calce, closed leather shoes with laces, were typically worn by the upper classes. Women often paired them with their stolas and pallas for religious ceremonies or public appearances, where formality mattered. The leather might be dyed in rich colours, reds, greens, even purples, showcasing expense and craftsmanship. These weren't shoes made for running through muddy streets. They were made to be seen. There were also specialised shoes for different settings. Banquets or theatre visits might call for softer, more luxurious slippers, often embroidered or lined with delicate materials. In contrast, travel demanded sturdier footwear, thicker-soled shoes that could endure rough terrain. Even within the domestic sphere, footwear varied. Women of wealth might own slippers inlaid with jewels or precious metals, worn only within the safety of their villas, never risking the dust of the forum. Footwear could even carry symbolic weight. Certain shoes were reserved for rites and rituals, their colours or styles tied to religious meanings. High-soled shoes added stature and grace, lifting the wearer above the crowd both literally and socially. Some shoes were designed to creak as the wearer walked, ensuring attention wherever she went. Writers often sneered at women who obsessed over fashionable shoes, accusing them of vanity or frivolity. Yet in reality, footwear was an extension of the broader Roman obsession with appearances. Just as the stola and palla spoke of virtue, so too did shoes reveal refinement, wealth, and cultural awareness. To Roman women, even the smallest detail beneath their hem was another chance to declare who they were and who they were not. In Rome, fabric was never just fabric. It was a silent battlefield of class, wealth, and power. What you wore, and especially what colour it was, told the world not just who you were, but what you were allowed to be. For women, this choice was deeply political. Wool was the traditional Roman fabric, practical and tied to old republican values of modest living. Women in humbler households spun and wove their own wool, and a plain wool stola marked a woman as virtuous, hard-working, and respectable. But as Rome expanded and the empire's wealth grew, fabrics from across the known world began to flood the markets. Linen from Egypt, cotton from India, and above all, silk from China transformed elite fashion. Silk was light, translucent, and scandalously expensive. To critics, it represented moral decline, proof that Roman women were draping themselves in the spoils of empire. To those who wore it, silk was pure prestige, every shimmer in the sunlight a reminder of their family's reach and resources. Colour, too, carried enormous weight. White wool suggested purity and simplicity, especially appropriate for ceremonies and religious rituals. Bright saffron was linked to weddings, fertility, and celebration. Deep greens and blues offered fashionable variety, but could never rival the status of purple. Tyrian purple, made from thousands of crushed sea snails, was the most coveted dye in the Roman world. So rare and costly was this pigment that laws restricted its use. Only emperors, empresses, and certain members of the elite could wear full garments of purple, though clever women often incorporated narrow stripes or borders into their stolas or pallas, to hint at power without breaking the rules. The politics of dye meant that a Roman woman's clothing was essentially a walking manifesto. A plain wool stola could say, "I honour tradition," while a silk palla in shimmering purple declared, "My family commands wealth and influence." The tension between these choices reflected the constant tug-of-war in Roman society between old republican ideals and imperial extravagance. Satirists like Juvenal ridiculed women who draped themselves in fabrics finer than spider webs, mocking their husbands for bankrupting themselves on foreign luxuries. Yet fashion was impossible to restrain. As long as Rome remained an empire of conquest and trade, its women would continue to wrap themselves in the colours of the world, and in doing so, make themselves living emblems of Rome's reach. In Rome, a woman's clothing was more than personal taste. It was a script she was forced to perform every day. Fashion revealed class as clearly as titles or wealth, and stepping outside those boundaries risked criticism or scandal. To dress was to declare who you were, and everyone was watching. For the elite, fashion was a stage of opulence. Senatorial and equestrian families draped their women in fine fabrics, jewelled accessories, and elaborate hairstyles that required teams of servants to maintain. A senator's wife strolling through the forum in a silk stola with a purple border sent a clear message. This was a household of wealth and influence. The very impracticality of her clothing, delicate fabrics, towering hairstyles, jewellery heavy enough to strain the neck, showed that she never had to work, that her life was far removed from the sweat of the marketplace or the fields. For the middling classes, fashion played a subtler role. Wives of merchants, artisans, or military officers might not afford silk or precious stones, but they could still signal respectability with wool stolas, modest palace, and carefully kept hairstyles. Here, clothing was less about dazzling displays and more about upholding honour. The woman's neat, restrained appearance reflected well on her household, telling neighbours that her family valued discipline and stability. At the lowest level of society, fashion was stripped to its basics. Enslaved women wore tunics. Simple, practical garments meant for labour, not beauty. Their hair was often cropped short or tied back, with little opportunity for adornment. Prostitutes, by law, were barred from wearing the stola, marking them instantly as outside the circle of respectable womanhood. Their clothing was deliberately provocative, designed to set them apart. Thus, garments did not merely express status, they enforced it. The Roman system of fashion also reinforced hierarchy in subtler ways. Laws known as sumptuary regulations tried to restrict extravagance, dictating who could wear certain fabrics or colours. Though often ignored by the wealthy, these laws underscored the point. Fashion was not freedom, It was a regulated performance of social class. For Roman women, then, every garment was loaded with meaning. Clothing told the story of her household, her husband's rank, her family's wealth, or lack of it. Whether she wanted to or not, her fashion choices bound her to the system of class, turning her body into a billboard for Rome's social order. For Roman women, fashion was never just personal, it was political theatre woven in silk, wool and gold. Every stola, every palla, every curl of hair was read as a sign of loyalty, morality, or ambition. In a society where women were excluded from formal politics, clothing became their language of influence, a way to maneuver within the rigid structures of Rome. Empresses set the tone. When Livia, wife of Augustus, appeared in simple white garments and understated jewellery, she was projecting the ideal of the modest, traditional matron, a perfect complement to Augustus's political image of restoring Roman virtue after years of civil war. Later, empresses like Julia Domna, with her iconic halo of curls, made hair itself a political statement, replicated across the empire by women who sought to align themselves with the imperial household. By copying an empress's style, elite women visually declared loyalty to the dynasty, turning fashion into propaganda. Public appearances made clothing even more significant. At religious festivals, women veiled their heads with the palla to signal reverence. At banquets, they wore brighter colours and displayed jewels to reflect their family's prosperity. Fashion operated as a sliding scale of messages, piety in one setting, luxury in another, all while maintaining the careful balance of modesty expected of a Roman woman. Too plain, and she risked appearing neglectful. Too extravagant, and she became a target for satire and moral outrage. Writers and politicians understood this power. Satirists like Juvenal ridiculed women whose fashion seemed to undermine traditional values, accusing them of corruption or greed. Meanwhile, moralists argued that excessive silks and jewels were signs of Rome's decline, blaming women for embracing foreign luxuries. Yet this criticism only proved how much weight fashion carried. Women's clothing became a convenient canvas for broader anxieties about empire, wealth, and morality. Cultural exchange also shaped Roman fashion. Contact with Egypt, Greece, and the Near East introduced new fabrics, dyes, and styles. By wearing them, Roman women both embraced and displayed Rome's global reach. A silk palla wasn't just beautiful. It was a reminder that Rome ruled trade routes stretching to India and beyond. Thus, Roman women's fashion was far more than vanity. It was a coded language of loyalty, a performance of virtue, a display of wealth, and a reflection of empire. In the folds of their stolas and the glitter of their jewels, women broadcasted messages about power and identity in a world where they could not speak in the Senate, but could still command attention in the forum. The tale of the 47 Ronin begins not on a battlefield, but in the polished corridors of Edo Castle, the heart of Tokugawa power. It was here, in 1701, that Lord Asano Naganori of Akko, a young daimyo entrusted with an important ceremonial duty, crossed paths with Kira Yoshinaka, a shogunate official responsible for instructing him in matters of court etiquette. On paper, their meeting should have been one of guidance and respect. In practice, it became the spark that would ignite one of Japan's most enduring legends. Kira was known for arrogance. He expected rich bribes and extravagant gifts from those he tutored, and when he felt slighted, his temper could be merciless. Asano, by contrast, was a man of upright character, not inclined to fawning gestures or wasteful spending. From the moment they interacted, Kira treated him with disdain, belittling his lack of lavish offerings, mocking his inexperience, and humiliating him in front of others. For a samurai, such insults were not mere words. They were wounds to honor, cuts deeper than steel. The tension simmered until the morning of April 21st, 1701. Asano, pushed beyond endurance by Kira's taunts, reached his breaking point. In the sacred precincts of Edo Castle, where violence was strictly forbidden, he drew his short sword and lunged at his tormentor. The strike wounded Kira, leaving blood but not death. Guards rushed to restrain Asano, Horrified that the shogun's palace had been stained with violence, the consequences were immediate and severe. To draw a blade within the castle was an act of unforgivable defiance, no matter the provocation. The shogunate acted swiftly. Lord Asano was sentenced to commit seppuku, the ritual suicide of a samurai. That very evening, in his Edo residence, he performed the grim duty with composure, leaving behind no heirs and no future for his house. His lands were confiscated, his clan dissolved. With a single stroke of his blade, Asano had sealed his fate, but he had also planted a seed in the hearts of his retainers. For the men of Akko, watching their lord die dishonored while his tormentor lived unpunished was unbearable. They were now masterless samurai, Ronin. And though the law demanded their obedience to the shogun's judgment, their souls burned with another code, the unyielding loyalty of the samurai to avenge their fallen master. With Lord Asano's seppuku carried out and his domain confiscated, the men of Akko found themselves adrift. Overnight, loyal retainers became Ronin, masterless samurai without rank, salary, or purpose. For men raised in a world where loyalty to one's lord was the foundation of life, it was a humiliation as bitter as the loss itself. Many clans in similar circumstances had scattered, seeking new masters. But the men of Akko were different. Their chief retainer, Oishi Kuranosuke, stood at the center of their grief. Calm, deliberate, and known for his wisdom, Oishi gathered the core group of Asano's retainers and posed the question none dared voice. Should they bow to fate, or should they avenge their lord? Vengeance was dangerous. It meant defying the shogunate, breaking the peace of the Tokugawa order, and likely meeting death. But to abandon their duty was unthinkable. In hushed voices they agreed. Their true loyalty was not to the shogun's decree, but to the man who had given them honor, Lord Asano. The plan was not declared openly, even among themselves. Instead, they swore a silent oath to one another. 47 men, bound by shared disgrace, would dedicate themselves to a single purpose, the destruction of Kira Yoshinaka. Yet vengeance could not be rushed. Kira, fearing retaliation, fortified his mansion and doubled his guard. The shogunate expected the Akko Ronin to scatter, but Kira expected the opposite, a direct strike. Patience would be their only weapon. Oishi, understanding this, disbanded the group temporarily. Some Ronin took up trades as merchants, artisans, or monks, blending into ordinary life. Others wandered, living as drifters to avoid suspicion. Even Oishi himself seemed to abandon the path of honor, moving to Kyoto, drinking heavily, and visiting brothels until he earned a reputation as a fallen man. To outsiders, it looked as though the Akko Ronin had lost their spirit. But beneath the facade, their bond remained unbroken. Every humiliation, every disguise was part of a larger strategy, to lull Kira into a false sense of security. For nearly 2 years they endured. Their oath was not sealed in ceremony or words carved in stone, but in the quiet determination of men who refused to let time or dishonor erase their master's name. The 47 Ronin had set themselves on a path that could end only in triumph or death, and in their hearts they welcomed both. While the Ronin scattered into disguise, Kira Yoshinaka lived in a state of anxious watchfulness. Though he had escaped Asano's blade with little more than a wound to his forehead, he knew the danger was not past. Samurai loyalty ran deep, and vengeance was a ghost that could haunt a man for years before striking. The thought of Asano's retainers biding their time gnawed at him day and night. At first, Kira reacted with paranoia. He fortified his mansion in Edo, hiring guards, raising high wooden walls, and ordering watchmen to patrol the grounds. Every creak in the night, every rumor in the streets, seemed like a sign that the Akko Ronin were near. He rarely ventured outside without an escort, and even then, his eyes scanned alleys and rooftops. To his retainers, he was a lord under siege from his own fears. Yet as months passed and no attack came, his vigilance wavered. News trickled in of Oishi Kuranosuke's supposed disgrace in Kyoto, how the once loyal retainer had abandoned dignity, drinking and consorting with courtesans. Other ronin were said to have melted into the population, taking up trades or vanishing into obscurity. Whispers suggested they had lost heart, broken by poverty and dishonor. Slowly, Kira's confidence returned. To those around him, Kira seemed eager to believe the threat had dissolved. He reduced his guards, relaxed the nightly watches, and resumed something like his former life of ceremony and courtly duties. Still, the stain of Asano's attack lingered. Many saw Kira as a man who had provoked his lord into a fatal breach of protocol, and his reputation suffered despite his survival. He feared public shame almost as much as he feared the Ronin's swords, but complacency crept in all the same. The fortifications remained, but the discipline within them softened. Guards slacked in their duties, assuming the danger had passed. Servants too grew careless, and Kira himself, relieved by the passage of time, lowered the shield of constant suspicion. He had convinced himself that the Ronin had abandoned vengeance, that they had chosen survival over loyalty. This was exactly the illusion Oishi and his men had cultivated. For every night Kira slept easier, believing himself safe, the Ronin drew closer to the moment when patience would give way to steel. Kira's uneasy vigilance, once sharp, was fading into the arrogance that would soon seal his fate. While Kira slowly let his guard down, Oishi Kuranosuke was crafting one of the most brilliant deceptions in samurai history. If the Ronin struck too soon, Kira would be ready, and the shogunate would crush them without hesitation. The only path to success was patience, and to make Kira believe vengeance was no longer possible. To achieve this, Oishi sacrificed his own honor. In Kyoto, Oishi deliberately dismantled his reputation. Once respected as a loyal and disciplined retainer, he began frequenting the pleasure quarters, staggering through the streets drunk and wasting nights in brothels. His family endured whispers of disgrace. His wife, unable to bear the shame, eventually left him. Even some of the Ronin questioned whether their leader had truly lost his way. Yet this fall into apparent ruin was carefully calculated. Every drunken stumble, every scene of debauchery, was a mask. Kira's spies in Kyoto reported back eagerly. The feared chief retainer of Akko had become a broken man. If their enemy's leader had collapsed into vice, then surely the other Ronin had dispersed for good. This was exactly the impression Oishi wanted. He knew that Kira's arrogance and need for reassurance would blind him to the possibility of deeper strategy. To the outside world, Oishi appeared finished, but behind the scenes, he was in constant communication with the surviving Akko Ronin. Letters, delivered in secret, coordinated their movements. Some Ronin became merchants, others monks, and one even married into a tradesman's family to disguise his true identity. Each sacrifice was made in silence, their loyalty hidden beneath the cloak of ordinary life. The deception was not without its dangers. At one point, a samurai from another clan, disgusted by Oishi's drunken behavior, attacked him in the street and spat upon him for betraying the way of the warrior. Oishi accepted the humiliation without resistance. For him, the insult was a weapon in disguise, proof that his charade was convincing. Every blow to his public image brought him closer to the moment of vengeance. By the time nearly 2 years had passed, Kira's confidence had fully returned. His defenses slackened, his vigilance dulled. To him, Oishi was a ruined man, and the Ronin of Akko were no more. But beneath the mask of disgrace, 47 blades still gleamed in the shadows, waiting for the night when patience would end and justice would begin. By late 1702, almost 2 years after Asano's death, the Ronin's long deception had run its course. Kira was comfortable again, his mansion less guarded, his vigilance dulled. The time for patience was ending. Quietly, Oishi began to call his scattered comrades back into the fold. One by one, from Kyoto, Edo, and the provinces, the men of Akko returned to their hidden brotherhood. The gathering was not done openly. Each Ronin had lived a double life, Merchants tending shops, monks chanting sutras, farmers working the soil. To abandon these disguises at once would have raised suspicion. Instead, they slipped away under false pretenses, converging on Edo like shadows. In rented houses on the city's outskirts, they reunited. What must it have felt like, after 2 years of secrecy and humiliation, to clasp the hands of comrades once more? They were no longer broken men. They were a living army of loyalty. At the center of their strategy was Oishi. He revealed to them that their disguises had succeeded. Kira believed them finished, his guard reduced. The time for vengeance had come. Yet he also reminded them that this mission was not glory, it was death. Attacking Kira was defiance of the shogunate, and the outcome was inevitable. None would live long after the deed. Still, each man swore again to the path of loyalty. Their oaths were not spoken lightly. They were binding promises to die with honor. They planned meticulously. The Ronin studied Kira's mansion, its walls, its gates, the routines of its guards. They even built a scale model of the estate to rehearse their attack. Each man was assigned a role, some to storm the gates, others to scale the walls, others to secure the inner chambers. Their weapons were polished, their armor prepared. Yet they kept their appearance modest, avoiding anything that might betray their purpose. One remarkable detail was their commitment to discipline. Despite the hunger and hardship of years without a lord, they forbade looting or personal gain. This was not to be a raid for profit, but a mission of honor. They were blades sharpened for one strike alone. As winter deepened in Edo, the Ronin waited for the night when their loyalty would explode into vengeance. Their secret gathering was complete. 47 men stood together, united by grief, by duty, and by a single unshakable truth. They would restore their master's honor, even if it cost them their lives. On the snowy night of January 30th, 1703, the Ronin struck. Edo lay cloaked in silence, its streets muffled by a heavy winter storm. It was the perfect cover. Snow to mask their footsteps, darkness to shield their approach. 47 men, dressed in black and armed with swords, spears, and bows, moved as one. After nearly 2 years of waiting, their oath was about to be fulfilled. Oishi divided the men into 2 groups. One would storm the front gate of Kira's mansion, drawing attention with ferocious noise. The other would scale the rear walls, surrounding the compound so no one could escape. Orders were strict: protect the innocent, harm no women, children, or servants. Their enemy was Kira alone, and the Ronin's honor demanded they act with discipline. The attack began with the crash of hammers and the crack of wood as the front gate gave way. The guards inside, startled from sleep, rushed to meet them, but the Ronin fought with precision. Their years of planning showed. Each man knew his place, his role, his target. Arrows flew into the night, drums beat to signal their movements, and the mansion erupted in chaos. Kira's retainers fought desperately, but they were outnumbered and unprepared. Some attempted to rally, but the Ronin pressed forward, cutting them down with steady resolve. At the rear of the estate, the second group scaled the walls and secured the exits, ensuring no escape was possible. The compound was a trap, and inside it, Kira Yoshinaka was cornered. As the battle raged, servants and women were ushered to safety. The Ronin shouted assurances that no harm would come to them, calming panic where they could. It was not slaughter but justice, carried out with the discipline of warriors bound by code. Still, the fighting was fierce. Blades clashed, shouts echoed through the snowy air, and blood stained the white ground. At last, the Ronin reached the inner chambers, but Kira was nowhere to be found. Rooms were searched, doors broken, cupboards emptied. The man who had mocked and humiliated their lord was hiding like a rat within his own walls. The Ronin pressed deeper, relentless, until they found the place where vengeance waited. This night was not a raid for plunder. It was the execution of an oath. And though the snow fell gently on Edo's rooftops, inside Kira's mansion, it was a storm of steel and loyalty. The The Ronin swept through Kira's mansion, room by room, their blades cutting through resistance until only silence remained. Yet their true target was still missing. Oishi ordered a thorough search. Lanterns flickered against wooden walls as men tore apart closets, slid open doors, and overturned chests. Servants were questioned at sword point. Finally, in a dark, out-of-the-way chamber, they found him. Kira Yoshinaka, trembling, concealed inside a storage shed, clutching nothing more than a short blade. It was a pitiful sight. The man whose arrogance had driven Lord Asano to ruin now crouched in fear, his face pale, his dignity gone. The Ronin dragged him into the open, and the moment felt heavy with history. After nearly 2 years of waiting, planning, and enduring disgrace, vengeance was within reach. But the Ronin were not murderers in the shadows. They were samurai, bound by code. Oishi stepped forward and addressed Kira with formality. He offered him the chance to die as a samurai by his own hand. The Ronin presented Kira with a dagger, the very blade that Lord Asano had used to commit seppuku in Edo Castle. The symbolism was unmistakable. The dishonored courtier would meet his end by the same steel that had taken the life of the man he had humiliated. But Kira faltered. He could not summon the courage to take his own life. Perhaps it was fear, perhaps shame. But in refusing seppuku, he revealed himself as the opposite of everything the samurai ideal demanded. After waiting a respectful moment, Oishi gave the order. One of the Ronin stepped forward and delivered the death blow, severing Kira's head cleanly with a single stroke. The act was quick, decisive, and untainted by cruelty. When it was done, the Ronin bowed. For them, vengeance was not an act of rage, but the fulfillment of duty. Kira's head was placed in a bucket, to be carried with solemn care. No cheers erupted, no celebrations. Instead, a deep silence fell over the mansion. Their oath had been kept. Their honour, and that of Lord Asano, was restored. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing the blood-stained ground. The Ronin gathered together, weary yet resolute. They had completed their mission, but they knew the path ahead was short. For samurai who defied the shogunate, there could be no pardon. Yet as they prepared to leave Kira's estate, each man walked with lighter steps. They had chosen loyalty over life, and in that choice, they had become immortal. With Kira's head secured, the 47 Ronin emerged from the mansion into the snowy streets of Edo. Dawn had not yet broken, and the city lay in hushed stillness, its rooftops heavy with white. The Ronin, weary from battle but resolute, formed a solemn procession. At the front, Oishi carried the bucket containing Kira's severed head, cradled not as a trophy but as proof of justice fulfilled. Behind him, the others followed in silence, their weapons blood-stained, their armour dusted with snow. The streets stirred with whispers as word spread. Townsfolk, peering from windows and doorways, recognized the men of Akko. For 2 years, these Ronin had been objects of pity or ridicule, masterless samurai who seemed to waste their lives in disgrace. Now, seeing them march in order with their vengeance complete, people bowed in respect. The spectacle was not one of rebellion, but of loyalty so pure it stirred awe. Even those who had mocked Oishi's drunken charade now realized its purpose. The Ronin's destination was Sengakuji Temple, where Lord Asano was buried. Their march was both funeral and pilgrimage. At each step, the snow muffled the sound of their sandals, as though the city itself were holding its breath. They passed checkpoints unchallenged. No one dared stop them, for their mission was already understood. In Edo, samurai values still carried weight, and the sight of men walking willingly toward their fate commanded reverence. When they reached the temple, the Ronin entered its quiet grounds. Before Asano's grave, they knelt and placed Kira's head upon the stone, offering it to their fallen lord as a final act of service. Some wept openly, their long years of shame and sacrifice pouring out in that moment. Others prayed silently, their faces calm with the serenity of duty fulfilled. For them, This was not revenge. It was restitution, the balancing of a cosmic scale tilted by injustice. The monks of Sengakuji received them with solemnity, offering shelter within the temple walls. But the Ronin knew this was not the end. Word of their deed would soon reach the shogun, and judgment was inevitable. Still, they rested peacefully that night. They had not fled, nor hidden their act. They had marched openly through Edo, announcing to all that their vengeance was just. By the next morning, their story had spread across the city like fire through dry grass. The Ronin had become more than men. They were the embodiment of loyalty, and their fate was now in the hands of the shogunate. The 47 Ronin did not flee after fulfilling their oath. Instead, they awaited the inevitable summons of the shogunate. To defy the law by killing Kira Yoshinaka was treason, but to abandon their lord's honor had been impossible. They had chosen the way of loyalty, knowing the price would be death. In Edo, debate flared across every class. Were these men criminals or heroes? The shogun, Tokugawa Tsunayoshi, faced a dilemma. On one hand, the Ronin had broken the shogunate's peace by committing an illegal vendetta. Allowing such an act to go unpunished might encourage other clans to take justice into their own hands. On the other, their loyalty embodied the very essence of the samurai code, Bushido, which the shogunate itself promoted as the moral backbone of society. Punish them harshly, and he risked turning martyrs into symbols greater than the law. After weeks of deliberation, the verdict was delivered. The Ronin would be permitted an honorable death. Rather than execution by disgraceful means, they were ordered to commit seppuku. This decision both upheld the law and recognized their loyalty. It was a compromise that satisfied no one completely, yet ensured their story would be remembered with dignity. On the appointed day, each Ronin prepared himself calmly. They dressed in white robes, the color of purity, and performed the ritual with the same discipline that had guided their mission. One after another, they opened their bellies, while their comrades stood ready to deliver the merciful final stroke. Even in death, they acted together, a brotherhood unbroken. The people of Edo mourned them. Crowds gathered at Sengakuji Temple, where the Ronin were buried alongside Lord Asano. Visitors left incense, flowers, and prayers, honoring men who had chosen loyalty over survival. In the centuries that followed, their graves became a pilgrimage site, and their story was retold in plays, poems, and novels. The tale of the 47 Ronin became not just a historical episode, but a moral legend, embodying the eternal struggle between law and honor. Their legacy endures because it forces a timeless question: is loyalty to one's lord greater than loyalty to the law? In choosing death over dishonor, the Ronin answered with their lives. More than 300 years later, their march through snowy Edo still echoes as one of the greatest stories of samurai devotion ever told. The story of Yoshiwara begins in the early 17th century, when the Tokugawa shogunate tightened its grip on Japan. Edo, the shogun's capital, had exploded into a bustling city of merchants, warriors, and travelers. With its swelling population came appetites for food, for theatre, for companionship. Pleasure was in demand, but unregulated indulgence carried dangers, disorder, disease, and unchecked crime. The government decided that desire, like everything else in Tokugawa Japan, needed to be contained, managed, and placed behind walls. In 1617, authorities granted official sanction to a licensed quarter devoted solely to entertainment and sex. It was built on marshy land outside Edo, reclaimed from swamps and rivers. The district was given the name Yoshiwara, Good Meadow, a name both ironic and poetic, hinting at a place where natural pleasure was cultivated under careful design. Surrounded by a moat and enclosed by high walls, Yoshiwara was literally a city within a city. There was only one gate. Once a man stepped through it, he entered a world where the rigid hierarchies of Edo life softened, if only for a night. The idea was both moral and practical. By confining brothels and courtesans to one location, the shogunate could monitor vice while profiting from it through taxes and regulations. Disorderly streets elsewhere in Edo were cleaned by pushing all illicit commerce into Yoshiwara, and within those walls, pleasure was not a crime, it was policy. Yet this containment also gave Yoshiwara an identity unlike anywhere else in Japan. It was a place where fantasy was staged, where reality was suspended, and where reputation, wealth, and longing collided under lantern light. From the beginning, Yoshiwara was more than a red light district. It was designed as an entertainment hub, where brothels stood beside tea houses, theatres, and shops. Its streets were laid out with an almost theatrical geometry, creating long processional avenues where courtesans could be displayed like living art. The district was not hidden in shame, it was showcased. Samurai, merchants, artisans, even poets and painters crossed its gate, seeking not just physical pleasure but immersion in a dream world. Thus, the birth of Yoshiwara was both an act of control and creation. By walling off vice, the shogunate had inadvertently built one of the most vibrant cultural centres of early modern Japan, a place where desire and artistry blended into a spectacle that would define Edo nightlife for centuries. Passing through the single grand gate of Yoshiwara was like stepping into another world. Outside, Edo followed the rigid order of Tokugawa law. Samurai at the top, merchants and artisans below, farmers bound to their land. Inside, hierarchy blurred, and wealth spoke louder than birth. A lowly merchant who bowed to samurai in the daytime could stroll into Yoshiwara at night, spend lavishly, and find himself seated beside men of higher rank. The walls of the district did more than enclose. They transformed. The city within was carefully planned. Broad avenues stretched in neat lines, designed for processions and display. At night, these streets glowed with hundreds of paper lanterns, their flickering light casting a warm haze on the wooden facades of brothels and tea houses. The most famous of these avenues was the Nakanocho, a wide main street where visitors paraded, courtesans appeared in formal procession, and the district itself became a stage. Even those who came with no money to spend could walk the streets, marvel at the colours, and catch glimpses of beauty behind latticed windows. The architecture itself announced Yoshiwara's purpose. Brothels were built with elegant facades, their upper floors screened with wooden latticework. Behind these slats, courtesans sat in view, dressed in brilliant silks, their faces painted white, their hair arranged in towering, elaborate styles. To the passerby, they were living ornaments, each a carefully arranged display of refinement and allure. Tea houses, meanwhile, buzzed with music, laughter, and the pouring of sake, offering spaces where deals were struck and poems recited. But Yoshiwara was more than its buildings. It was an atmosphere. The sounds of shamisen, the sharp crack of getter sandals on the wooden streets, the mingling of perfumes and incense filled the night air. It was said that even the air smelled different inside Yoshiwara, thick with excitement and anticipation. To enter was to step out of ordinary life and into a dream carefully crafted to intoxicate the senses. What made Yoshiwara unique was the way it mixed control with fantasy. Every movement was choreographed, every display curated, yet the effect was one of liberation. Visitors knew they were in an artificial world, but that was precisely the appeal. For a few hours, they were free from the weight of rank, duty, and the monotony of daily life. Yoshiwara was not just a place. It was an escape, a parallel city where desire shaped reality. At the heart of Yoshiwara were its women, the courtesans, who transformed the district from a marketplace of bodies into a theatre of fantasy. Unlike common prostitutes elsewhere, Yoshiwara's courtesans were elevated into celebrities. They were not hidden in back alleys, but displayed openly, dressed in silks so dazzling that poets compared them to blossoms in eternal spring. Courtesans were ranked in a strict hierarchy, with the most celebrated known as oiran. These women were not merely companions, but arbiters of fashion and taste. They trained for years in calligraphy, poetry, music, and dance. An evening with an oiran was not simply a transaction. It was a performance of refinement, where wit, elegance and artistry mattered as much as beauty. To win an audience with one required enormous wealth and patience. Often, men had to prove their seriousness by visiting multiple times, spending lavishly in tea houses before they were even granted the privilege of speaking to her directly. The appearance of an oiran in public was an event in itself. She would parade through Yoshiwara's main avenue accompanied by attendants, her robes layered in rich fabrics, her towering hairstyle pinned with ornate combs and hairpins. On her feet were komagata, platform sandals so high she could only walk slowly, each step deliberate and theatrical. Crowds gathered to watch, for the oiran embodied the ultimate fusion of desire and spectacle. She was a living symbol of luxury, the pinnacle of Edo's pleasure culture. Beneath the glamour, however, lay stark realities. Many courtesans began as young girls sold into the district by impoverished families, bound by contracts they had little choice in. Life in Yoshiwara was a paradox, gilded with luxury, yet caged by obligation. For every oiran who commanded admiration, countless others lived and died in obscurity, serving customers with little chance of rising in rank. Their painted smiles concealed the exhaustion of endless nights, the burden of debts, and the fragility of a life dictated by beauty's short span. Yet within this paradox, courtesans carved out influence. They shaped trends in fashion and language, inspiring kabuki theatre and literature. Men of wealth and status vied for their attention, and poets immortalized them in verse. In a society that confined most women to domestic spheres, Yoshiwara's courtesans became public figures, simultaneously powerful and powerless, adored and exploited. They were the stars of Yoshiwara, and without them, the lantern-lit streets would have been little more than shadows. While the courtesans were the jewels of Yoshiwara, the district's life pulsed through its tea houses and theatres. These were not side attractions, but essential stages in the choreography of pleasure. They provided the setting where introductions were made, reputations polished, and nights of extravagance unfolded. Tea houses in Yoshiwara were unlike the quiet establishments elsewhere in Edo. Here, they were lively hubs, buzzing with music, conversation, and the constant pouring of sake. A guest's evening often began in one of these tea houses, where he was entertained by attendants, musicians, and sometimes lower-ranking courtesans. These spaces functioned as intermediaries. No man simply walked into a brothel and demanded an oiran. He had to establish himself first, often with the tea house acting as a broker. The more lavishly he spent in these early stages, the greater his chances of being recommended to a high-ranking courtesan. The atmosphere inside was intoxicating. Musicians played shamisen, dancers performed traditional routines, and witty banter flowed as freely as the sake. For samurai, merchants, and poets alike, this was more than indulgence. It was theatre. Men performed roles of sophistication and generosity, hoping to impress. To hold one's own in a Yoshiwara tea house meant demonstrating not just wealth, but cultural polish. The ability to compose a poem, appreciate a melody, or engage in clever wordplay. Alongside tea houses, theatres added another layer to the district's allure. Kabuki, once considered a rowdy form of entertainment, found a natural home in Yoshiwara's orbit. Its colourful costumes, exaggerated gestures, and dramatic plots mirrored the heightened realities of the pleasure district itself. Many kabuki plays were inspired by Yoshiwara life, turning courtesans and clients into archetypes on stage. In return, kabuki actors often mingled with Yoshiwara's clientele, blurring the line between performance and reality. The synergy between tea houses, courtesans, and theatres gave Yoshiwara its unique cultural depth. It was not only a place to purchase intimacy, but to participate in a wider spectacle of refinement. A night in Yoshiwara was an orchestration of senses: the taste of sake, the sound of shamisen strings, the sight of lantern-lit parades, the scent of incense wafting through crowded rooms. Every detail contributed to the illusion that within these walls one lived not an ordinary life, but a heightened, almost dreamlike existence. Yoshiwara thrived because it offered more than pleasure. It offered performance. And in this theatre of desire, Everyone, from merchants to poets, became both spectator and actor. If courtesans were the stars of Yoshiwara, the patrons were its lifeblood. Every lantern that glowed and every shamisen that played was fueled by the silver and ambition of those who passed through the district's gate. What made Yoshiwara fascinating was not just who worked there, but who came seeking its pleasures. Men from every corner of Edo society, all temporarily equalized by desire and wealth. Merchants were the most frequent visitors. In the strict Tokugawa hierarchy, merchants occupied one of the lowest official classes, yet in reality they held vast financial power. Samurai might have status, but merchants controlled coin. Yoshiwara became the one place where their money could buy not just luxury, but status. Inside its walls, a wealthy merchant could command the attention of an oiran, dine in style, and be treated as if he were nobility. In this way, the district inverted Edo's rigid order, allowing the merchant class to flaunt influence denied to them outside. Samurai, meanwhile, entered Yoshiwara with a different aura. They were bound by duty, but many found themselves drawn to the pleasures within. Some came as patrons of high rank, displaying both authority and refinement by courting famous courtesans. Others, however, slipped in secretly, their visits disguised to avoid scrutiny from superiors. For samurai, Yoshiwara offered a paradox, a place where honor and discipline gave way to indulgence, yet also a stage where they could perform sophistication through poetry, music, and cultured conversation. Poets and artists were perhaps the most enchanted by Yoshiwara. The courtesans themselves inspired endless verse, paintings, and woodblock prints. Many artists lingered in tea-houses, not because they could afford the company of an oiran, but because they were captivated by the spectacle of beauty and performance. Haiku, love poems, and satirical songs poured from the pens of those who visited, turning Yoshiwara into both muse and marketplace of creativity. Even the shogunate officials and nobility could be counted among the visitors, though their presence was often discreet. Yoshiwara was, after all, a mirror of Edo itself, rigid by day, fluid by night. Here, social roles blurred under candlelight, and men performed versions of themselves they could never display in the rigid streets beyond the gate. Patrons sustained Yoshiwara not just with their money, but with their longing to escape. The district was a theatre, and every man who entered became both audience and actor in its shimmering play of desire. Yoshiwara was more than a district of pleasure. It was a cultural engine that shaped the entire aesthetic of Edo. The term ukiyo, meaning floating world, was born here, a philosophy of living in the moment, savouring beauty, and accepting life's fleeting nature. Within Yoshiwara's walls, fashion and art weren't side notes. They were the heartbeat of this world of ephemerality. Courtesans, especially the famed oiran, were trendsetters. Their elaborate silk kimonos, heavy with embroidered cranes, chrysanthemums or waves, dazzled visitors and set standards copied across the city. Each season brought new colours and motifs, and tailors in Edo rushed to imitate the styles glimpsed in Yoshiwara parades. Hairstyles, too, grew more extravagant, towering arrangements pinned with dozens of kanzashi hair ornaments. What began as the fashion of courtesans trickled down into the city's streets, reshaping the appearance of women far beyond the pleasure quarter. Art flourished in Yoshiwara's glow. Woodblock prints, or ukiyo-e, immortalized courtesans, actors, and famous scenes from the district. These prints circulated widely, allowing even those who never passed through the Yoshiwara gate to experience its allure. Artists like Kitagawa Utamaro captured the delicate beauty of courtesans, while Utagawa Hiroshige and Hokusai depicted the lantern-lit avenues and moonlit rooftops of the quarter. Through their works, Yoshiwara's pleasures became both fantasy and commodity, spreading across Japan like souvenirs of desire. Theatre, especially kabuki, fed from this same well. Plots often mirrored the intrigues and romances of Yoshiwara, while actors borrowed the flamboyant styles of courtesans. In turn, courtesans styled themselves after kabuki stars, creating a feedback loop of performance and imitation. Audiences flocked to plays that dramatized the life of the district, turning Yoshiwara into both muse and mirror. Even poetry and literature found fertile ground here. Samurai and merchants alike composed verses inspired by their nights in the floating world, blending longing with melancholy. To write of Yoshiwara was to write of fleeting beauty, of cherry blossoms that fall even as they bloom. In this way, Yoshiwara was not just a marketplace of bodies, but of ideas. Its fashions dictated trends, its art filled homes across the city, and its ethos of living for the moment, of savouring life's fleeting joys, defined an entire cultural era. The floating world was a dream, but one that left very real imprints on Japanese art, literature, and style. To the outsider strolling Yoshiwara's lantern-lit streets, the district appeared as a dazzling carnival of freedom. Men could mingle across class lines, courtesans appeared to command attention like queens, and the atmosphere promised escape from the rigid order of Tokugawa society. Yet beneath the shimmer, Yoshiwara was not liberation. It was confinement wrapped in silk. The women at the center of the spectacle often had little choice in their fate. Many had been sold into Yoshiwara as children by impoverished families, bound to brothels by contracts that lasted years, sometimes decades. The path to becoming a high-ranking courtesan like an oiran was brutally narrow. Most girls labored at lower ranks, their lives consumed by long nights, demanding patrons and crushing debts. To outsiders, they appeared as icons of glamour. To themselves, they were trapped within a gilded cage. Even the oiran, admired as cultural leaders and arbiters of taste, lived within strict boundaries. Their every movement was choreographed, from the way they walked in processions to the way they conversed with clients. The appearance of choice was itself part of the performance. Men believed they were pursuing the courtesan, proving their worth through repeated visits and lavish spending. In reality, the courtesan's freedom to accept or reject was tightly managed by the brothel's interests. What seemed like agency was often strategy, designed to maximize profit while keeping the illusion alive. The illusion extended to the patrons as well. A merchant might feel like a lord for the night, basking in the attentions of courtesans, but once he stepped back through the gate, the strict social hierarchy of Edo awaited him. Samurai, who let themselves relax within Yoshiwara's walls, returned to the rigid codes of duty and obedience outside. Yoshiwara's promise of freedom was temporary, a dream one rented with coin, but never truly owned. Yet perhaps that fleeting quality was its greatest power. The district thrived because it offered the fantasy of liberation, even if only for a few hours. The courtesan's smiles, the music of shamisen, the poetry exchanged in candlelight, all created a space where both men and women could pretend, if only briefly, that they lived in a world unbound by duty and rank. Yoshiwara's brilliance lay not in offering real freedom, but in selling its illusion so convincingly that people returned again and again, willingly stepping into the cage for another taste of the dream. If Yoshiwara was a dream world, it was one forever haunted by fire. Edo was a city of wood and paper, and Yoshiwara, with its dense rows of brothels and lantern-lit streets, was especially vulnerable. Time and again, flames swept through the district, reducing its shimmering facades to smouldering ash. Each time, the courtesans and patrons scattered in panic, only for the district to be rebuilt and reborn, as though pleasure itself was indestructible. The most devastating of these disasters came in 1657 with the Great Meireki Fire, which consumed much of Edo. Yoshiwara was utterly destroyed. In its ashes, authorities saw an opportunity. Rather than abandoning the district, they relocated it farther from Edo's center onto reclaimed marshland north of Asakusa. This new Yoshiwara became even more elaborate, with wider avenues, deeper moats, and grander brothels. What fire had consumed, spectacle replaced. The district's rebirth only added to its mystique. It seemed nothing could extinguish the floating world. Yet with each rebuilding came change. By the 18th century, Yoshiwara reached its golden age, drawing samurai, merchants, artists, and poets in a constant stream. But prosperity also brought decline. The romantic aura of the oiran began to wane as the culture shifted. Courtesans of the highest rank required enormous investments of time and wealth, and many patrons sought quicker pleasures with lower-ranking women. Kabuki actors and geisha, offering entertainment outside Yoshiwara's gates, competed for attention. The monopoly of desire once held firmly behind Yoshiwara's walls began to fray. By the 19th century, Yoshiwara's image had shifted again. Fires still ravaged its streets, but rebuilding no longer restored its full brilliance. The rise of new forms of entertainment, tea house geisha, theatre culture, even the beginnings of Western influence, drew people elsewhere. The oiran, once unrivaled icons of fashion, were increasingly seen as relics of an older era. The very system that had elevated them, rigid hierarchy, long rituals and costly contracts, made them less adaptable than the emerging geisha, who offered intimacy and artistry in more flexible, accessible ways. Still, decline did not mean disappearance. Yoshiwara remained a landmark of Edo life, woven into the city's identity. Its fires and rebuildings mirrored the fleeting nature of the floating world itself. Everything beautiful was destined to vanish, only to return in another form. In this cycle of destruction and renewal, Yoshiwara embodied both the resilience and impermanence of pleasure. Though the Yoshiwara Pleasure District eventually declined, its cultural imprint has never faded. By the late 19th century, with Japan opening to the west and Edo transformed into Tokyo, the old floating world began to unravel. Western fashions and entertainments competed with traditional forms, and the Meiji government viewed licensed prostitution with increasing unease. By the early 20th century, Yoshiwara's grandeur had faded into something more sordid, and the fires of World War II finally reduced much of the district to ruins. Yet the memory of Yoshiwara proved more enduring than its walls. What survived was the myth. A lantern-lit city where desire, art, and performance blended into a shimmering spectacle. Artists of the ukiyo-e tradition had already immortalized Yoshiwara in prints that circulated widely, ensuring that its courtesans and streets lived on as icons. Writers and poets, too, had woven its atmosphere into verse, capturing the bittersweet tension between beauty and impermanence. Even as the real district vanished, Yoshiwara lingered in Japan's imagination as a symbol of the floating world itself. The oiran, once flesh and blood women bound by contracts, became legendary figures. In festivals today, their processions are reenacted, with performers in towering hairpieces and impossibly tall sandals moving slowly through the streets. These parades echo the grandeur of Yoshiwara's past, transforming what was once commerce into cultural heritage. The geisha, who rose partly in Yoshiwara's shadow, carried forward the artistic traditions of music, dance, and refined entertainment, giving another afterlife to the district's legacy. Modern Japan remembers Yoshiwara with ambivalence. On one hand, it is seen as a place of exploitation, where women were trapped in gilded cages for the sake of men's pleasure. On the other, it is celebrated as a cradle of art, fashion, and literature, a place where creativity flourished under lantern light. This tension reflects the very nature of Yoshiwara itself, a paradox of beauty and suffering, freedom and confinement. Today, traces of the district survive in Tokyo's neighborhoods, in museums, in prints, and in festivals. But perhaps Yoshiwara's true legacy lies in the way it embodied the fleeting, bittersweet beauty of life itself. Like cherry blossoms falling at their peak, Yoshiwara dazzled precisely because it could not last. In memory and myth, it remains Japan's most famous dream of desire, a city that floated above reality and yet defined it.